Hello, and welcome back to Falling Walls Breakthrough Conversations. This is a private space for interaction with global leaders, outstanding scientists, emerging innovators, and science entrepreneurs, focusing on their individual research, career paths, and experiences. You in the audience are very much encouraged to interact and engage with our speakers. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function in Zoom and you'll be spotlighted, unmuted, and then invited to ask your question. If you have any technical questions, please add those into the chat and one of our moderators will get back to you. I'm Nicola Jones. I'm the Head of Publishing for the Springer Nature Sustainable Development Goals programme, and I'm joined for the next 25 minutes by Marius Brand. Just find my notes. So Marius is the Executive Vice President for Sasol 2.0 transformation at the chemical and energy company Sasol. He's responsible for the group-wide transformation programme positioned to achieve the future Sasol strategy. In addition, he's accountable for the new Sasol business unit, Sasol Eco-FT, which uses their proven Fischer-Tropsch technology to produce sustainable fuels and chemicals from sustainable hydrogen and carbon sources. He's participating in the Sustainable Hydrogen Economy panel this afternoon. And so to open our conversation, Marius, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm very interested to find out what Sasol is doing to facilitate the energy transition.
Thanks, Nicola, and thank you for the invitation. Certainly when we look at our company, we really build our company on coal and coal to liquids originally. So it's been, for us, a successful pathway so far. But, you know, in the recent period, obviously, our goal has been to transform. So I think twofold. Firstly, how do we reduce greenhouse gas emissions at pace? And I think that's critical for us. But secondly, also, how do we create new value pools and value businesses in this regard? So for that purpose, we have launched a couple of key strategic drives under the Sasol 2.0 effort, and I think one of them is the Sasol Eco-FT, in which we want to position a very known technology, the Fischer-Tropsch technology, actually from Germany, and really replace the carbon that we've got in the past from coal and from natural gas, and bring into that natural, sustainable carbon sources, as well as green hydrogen, which is so critical to produce petroleum and chemical products. So in this regard, we've set ourselves a 30% reduction on our current operations in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030 and a net zero carbon footprint by 2050. So we're on this transition path. It's very exciting. It's very daunting. We do need to see cost curves come down, but we believe together with partners we can be very successful in this journey.
Great, and you've obviously worked for Sasol for quite a long time. How have you seen attitudes changing in the energy industry towards sustainability?
Nicola, that's a very good question. I think I must say over the last half a decade, it really has accelerated. So I'm with the company for 30 years. I really spent all my life with the company. And it's, I would say, only in the last 10 years that we have really seen the industry start to transform. Firstly, really the petroleum industry, and as we saw that advancements taking place. And as consumer pressure has been building up in the recent years, we've seen an accelerated transformation also in the chemical businesses. Now, obviously, we are very dependent on technologies that can work for us, that really can bring affordable feedstocks. For us, it's very critical, and for the industry, it's very critical. So as we go on this transformation, I think we do see excitement, I think, in terms of the opportunities that comes with technology, but we also see a dire need for regulation and for regulatory environment to support this transformation. The last one is obviously for us as a country, South Africa, we have to what we refer to as just transition. It's got a huge social impact to move away from coal. A lot of our country has employment in mining, in the services, and the industries built around that. And we have to build new industries around hydrogen, around clean carbon. So that's really that very important transition to make sure that we are also socially acceptable in the way that we transition.
And do you think there is a kind of tension here?
Absolutely, there's significant tension. There's not only the tension that we see from regulation, but I think we also see a very positive tension from society. You know, society, as well as our own employees that want to work in a company that are much more sustainable. We are all very cognizant of the reality of transformation and transition that we have to do. So it's not something that we can do tomorrow. Close down a coal mining activity and just switch over. We have to have that transition and a responsible transition. But the tension is there to do it at pace and to do it effectively and you know, with other people, you know, I think including our communities and the society that we live in there.
That's very interesting, actually, to hear that there's tension kind of on both sides, because when you think of the kind of industries that you're in, you don't always necessarily think of them at the forefront of sustainability transformations. But it's interesting to hear that your employees and the kind of wider environment actually is pushing for change. Have you encountered any resistance to the plans that you're implementing at Sasol then?
I would say the resistance normally comes from the ability and let me say the clarity of the picture, you know. So to say, you know, we are moving into an area which is very new in some areas. Are we realistic as leaders of the company? And I think sometimes there would be that response to say, but, you know, let's first proven. You know, the technology, as engineers, we would like to have high certainty. Yes, we have to take a bit of leap of faith here. And I think for us to get our employees firstly around us, to be positive about the future, be positive about the climate change, that it's achievable, I think is extremely important. So, yeah, I think dialogue does help, communication does help to overcome those resistances, but I think it's really, we see much more positive support and I think a keenness to be part of this transition.
Wonderful. And you mentioned the energy side of the business. How about the chemical side of the business? Do you have anything you can share with us there?
So within the Sasol Eco EFT, we have two products that will come out from the Fischer-Tropsch technology, both the sustainable fuels, but also sustainable chemicals. And the technology allows you to have quite a variety in terms of product slate. So in terms of chemicals, obviously it's important that in the initial period, because it's a nascent technology still, and the application, the collective application thereof, one has to cater for the higher cost that you would have. And how you transition that is quite important. You can't have just the consumer carrying the cost. So government support is important, especially in the transition period, to make sure you can bridge that period, Nicola. So I think it's an important journey. But the chemical industry and the big chemical customers are very positive, and they have been, inundating Sasol with requests to expand, to introduce new. So I think we are responding as far as we can, within our means, obviously. But I think it's a very exciting journey for us, and I think great collaboration also amongst the chemical companies, I must say.
That's very exciting to hear, very encouraging to hear as well. I'd just like to remind the audience that you can use the raise hand function in Zoom to ask a question. Turning back to you, Marius, then you mentioned collaboration. In the last conversation I had, we talked about collaboration and competition, collaboration and competitiveness. And I'm just interested to hear how you see this happening in the chemical industry, where obviously there are a number of big players. The organisations that you might collaborate with would also be your competitors.
Yeah, that's always a very tricky area, and I think well guarded from a regulation point of view. I think when you look at the pace of the required transformation, you have to find those feedstock or enabling technologies that needs a combined effort. And we need regulators to support us in that and say, let me take an example. If I take a direct capture, you know, in the impact that can have on society, this is possibly an area where the industry should be able to work together within a regulated environment. But it's going to be required. And I think once we have that in place, obviously we can build our differentiated streams and we can, you know, bring our own competitive edge to that. But there are certain building blocks that are really required for us to enable the industry as such. And I think those are the ones that I think we have to think deeply of how we can do that. I know there's a lot of venture capital and venture funding that are trying to do that, but certainly I think there's a space for us to really see what can we collaborate within the acceptable, you know, competitive legislation and the likes. But on our own we can't do it, and I think we need partners, we need the industry to work together if we want to do it at pace. If we want to let go and go normally, slow pace, then there will be outcome for that.
And how about collaboration outside the industry?
I think it's very critical when we look at our ecosystem in which we operate. You know, it starts from feedstock right down to products and off-takers. But I think if you look at the industry that we in and outside, I think we've seen much improved or much more required engagement with government. I think making sure that we also bring learning institutions on board, the appropriateness of basic research and applied research. Also innovators, you know, how do we bring startups into our fold, which is perhaps in the past an area where we have not allowed so many to come into the place. But that's really, if you put those combinations together, we really see fast innovation. And I think this is what we're going to need to be successful. So I think that has picked up a lot. A lot of universities in South Africa has reached out to SASL to say how can they become more appropriate and more relevant into this transformation journey, in which they also dearly feel responsible to make a contribution in.
And actually, the idea of startups is really pertinent to the Falling Walls conference. There are a lot of innovators. There's a lot of science startups here. So how do you see them contributing in sustainability transitions?
We actually, in our strategy, see them as an essential part of what we want to achieve. You know, we have deep technology experience around Fischer-Tropsch and other related chemical technologies. But I think in terms of getting different technologies together and having also the ability to access smaller entities to work on new technology opportunities, we see startups as a crucial component of that. And I think we really would like in our next journey engage much with them. We are trying to get our own venture capital platform together and see how we can do that. It's a learning for us, certainly, but I think it's also a place where we can create more new industries. And I think that's going to be critical for us.
So that was actually going to be my next question. How is SASL facilitating startups? Maybe you could say a little bit more.
So we are early in that journey, Nadia. So just say that I think what for us is critical, firstly, we do believe we have to, in South Africa, where we are headquartered, to play a significant role in that regard. So we are working with the South African government, and it's been really so far very exciting. The relationships are very positive. But I think for us also to create platforms where startups can work, how we can fund them, how can we give them access to real opportunities, but that access also has to be in the form of being able to fail and being able to learn through the process. So we want to create that platform. We want to work with others in that journey and certainly see if we can't have a more collective approach in allowing startups to be successful and allowing them to get proper funding for what we certainly need to be resolved from a technology point of view, but certainly allow them to have freedom and do things that they do much better than corporates can do. And that's speed, that's agility, and that's the innovation that we look for.
So it's interesting that you just mentioned failure there, because I think that's something that often we don't talk about when we're talking about startups, and you see the successful startups, don't you? Can you tell us a bit more about why it's important that startups be given the space to fail?
I think if we want to move at the pace that the industry requires to meet these very exciting greenhouse gas targets that we're setting and really trying to counter the climate change efforts, we can't go the traditional way of long-term sequential type of improvement. So I think for us, really to allow and to be open about it, that, obviously one has to manage your risk around that, but I think to allow startups to be able to take many topics that we are interested in and take them forward. Those could be in the form of real just entrepreneurial startups, but also working with universities and technical institutions to be able to pursue research work perhaps they would not have been able to fund in the past, and which could give us an opportunity to explore faster, get perhaps better collaboration and opportunity to be successful in that. So I think that's really for us very important. Otherwise it's just going to take too long, and I think we will not have the opportunity to get those big successes really quickly enabled. So that's going to be important for us.
So collaboration's been a really big theme of what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes or so. We've talked about collaboration with governments and outside of the chemical industry, but you've mentioned universities a couple of times. I'm interested to hear how you see universities as a partner for what you're doing.
So a lot of universities, struggle also with funding. I think that's a big issue. So our early concepts are here to get universities, and we've actually just concluded a round on that, really put the industry challenge that we are facing out to them and ask for response and for funding needs and for projects that we can fund and work with them. I think we have been, in terms of response, been very positively perceived. We see a bigger need from universities to work with private companies, to get masters and doctoral students out at plants and really get into deep contact with the challenges we're facing. So I think it's been very positively received. I think we are going to make mistakes, but we have to advance on that and really give them the opportunity to be successful. I think a bigger challenge for us is working cross continents, and say, how do we get multiple universities to work together, be it perhaps an African university with a European university. I think this is really going to be required for us all to be successful. And we have to explore all of those opportunities.
And if I could just ask you one final question, and quite a big one probably, where do you see are the particular challenges that we need to be solved, that we need to have solved to move to a sustainable hydrogen, let's say, economy?
I think there's three things that stands out. Firstly, I think affordability at speed. That's going to be very critical for us. And I think that really means that we have to get costs down on the feedstock value curve. Secondly, I would say accessibility, to have hydrogen available at developed countries, but also developing countries taking part in that journey. And I think the third one that we have to not underestimate is acceptability. How do we get the society to accept the challenge that we face, specifically in hard-to-abate environments, but really how do we also make sure that they're comfortable with the safety and everything that goes with that, and see for themselves also opportunities to participate in that economies. I think if we can get those three right, I think we're going to make it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think, we could talk about this for the rest of the day, probably. And I hope the panel this afternoon is as interesting and stimulating as our conversation's just been. Thank you very much, Marius, for joining us today. Thank you very much to our audience as well. We will be back in about 5 minutes with our next breakthrough conversation. So if you would like to stay on the line for that, please keep your Zoom open.